I was mopping the corridor outside Trauma Bay 2 when the federal marshals came through the doors. There were three of them, badges on lanyards, moving fast, wheeling a gurney that carried a man I thought was already dead. He was gray-white, lips the color of old ash, an oxygen mask fogged and then not fogging, which told you everything. The one marshal in front was on his radio. Ridgeline Regional. We are in the building. We need a surgeon now. And I pressed myself against the wall and let them through, because that is what you do when 400 pounds of controlled urgency rolls your way at 2 in the afternoon. I was 22 years old. I had been an orderly at Ridgeline Regional Medical Center for 11 months. It was a level 2 trauma center in a county most people only pass through, and I had seen plenty of bad days come through those doors. But I had never seen a man brought in by federal marshals with no paperwork I could read, no name on the wristband the triage nurse slapped on him, only a case number and a federal medical override code that made our administrator, Glenn Partridge, go very quiet when he read it. What I remember most about the next 4 minutes is Dr. Harlan Voss. Voss was our senior trauma attending. 16 years in that bay, the fastest hands I had seen on any surgeon, and a voice that carried like a foghorn and expected walls to move out of its way. He was a good doctor. I want to be honest about that. He was also a man who had a clear unspoken ledger of who counted in a trauma bay and who did not, and he enforced that ledger without a word, just a look or a turn of the shoulder that put you exactly where he had decided you belonged. The float nurse working that afternoon was a woman named Carver. She had come to us 4 weeks prior from an agency, assigned to overflow when our census ran high, and she had been quiet in the way that people are quiet when they already know the room and don't need to prove it. 30s, dark-haired, moved through a ward like she was reading it rather than walking through it. I had exchanged maybe 20 words with her total. She handled her assignments without complaint, never asked the charge nurse for a task twice, and was not the sort of person you noticed unless you were paying attention, which, in a busy house, most people were not. Voss noticed her exactly the way he noticed all the float staff, as something to be assigned and managed, not consulted. When the marshals came in with their man, Carver was already at the bay doors. She had her gloves on and had read the fogged oxygen mask from across the hallway the same way I had. She moved toward the gurney, and Voss, who had just come out of a consult 2 rooms down, stepped between her and the patient with one practiced motion, the way a man steps between a door and the wind. "I've got this," he said, not harshly, "just the way you close a door." His airway sounds compromised. Carver said, "I can hear it from here." "You're overflow staffing," Voss said, still not unkindly, in the tone of a man reading a label. "Check on the hip replacement in 8. I'll call if I need a hand." She didn't argue. She stepped back, and I watched Voss take the patient, which was his right and his bay and his call. I went back to my mop. I had rounds to finish. I heard the monitor tone change 7 minutes later. I don't know exactly what went wrong. I was not in the room. What I know is what I pieced together from the charge nurse afterward, and from what I saw with my own eyes when I came back down the corridor, because the sound of a monitor alarm in a trauma bay at that pitch is not something you mop through. What I saw, Voss at the head of the gurney, his face tight, his jaw set, 2 of his residents moving fast on either side, the patient flat and not moving, the monitor a hard flat tone, the oxygen mask off. One resident had a laryngoscope in his hand, not intubated yet, and I could see from the door that the patient's throat was working in a way that a throat should not work, a fine visible tension, a desperation, and the resident's hands were not steady. And standing in the corridor just outside the bay, still wearing her gloves, was Carver. She was watching through the glass panel in the door. I don't know how long she had been there. She was not panicking. She was not pacing. She was standing still and reading the room the way she read everything. And when the resident's third attempt at the tube failed, and Voss said, loud enough that I heard it through the door, "I'm losing him," she pushed the door open and walked in. Voss turned. "I need you out of this bay," he said. "His airway is closing," she said. "Blunt trauma. Likely tracheal shift. You're not going to tube him in time." She was already at the supply cart, her hands moving with a certainty that was not quick so much as it was exact. The way hands move when they have done a thing in the dark, in the cold, with less than what is on this cart. "I need a 10-blade, a curved hemostat, and a crick tube, right now." Voss stepped forward. "This is my bay, and that man is dying," she said, not loudly, not emotionally. Just the next sentence after the last one. "Tell me no, and he dies in the next 90 seconds. Or step back." The room went very still. I have thought about that moment many times in the years since. Voss was not a coward. He was a man whose professional universe had arranged itself around the premise that he was the most qualified person in any room he entered. And in most rooms he was right. But something in the way Carver moved, the economy of it, the complete absence of theater, the hands was already at the cart reaching for exactly the right things in exactly the right order. Something broke through. He stepped back. She worked. I watched her perform a surgical cricothyrotomy on a man whose airway had closed to nothing. And I want to be careful about how I describe it, because I am not a doctor, and I cannot tell you about the procedure the way a textbook would. What I can tell you is what it looked like. It looked like a thing done by a person who had done it before, not in a simulation, not in a classroom, but in a real place with real consequences, probably in bad light, probably under conditions no one in this trauma bay had ever worked under. Her hands did not shake. Her face did not change. She spoke twice during the procedure, once to tell the scrub tech which suction setting, and once to tell the resident to her left where to hold the light. The monitor tone broke. A beat, too. The patient breathed. And then she was at his chest with a needle, and she said tension pneumo, left side. I can hear it before any of us in that room had processed that the airway problem was solved, because she had already moved to the next problem, the way a medic moves, not celebrating, not pausing, just finding the next thing killing the man and addressing it with the same quiet precision. Voss was watching her. He watched her the way I watched her, the way all of us watched her, with the specific, slow, uncomfortable expression of a person who has just realized they did not know what they were looking at. The patient stabilized, not dramatically, not with a gasp or a triumphant monitor spike. He simply stopped the hard work of dying and began the slow work of living, and the room settled around that fact like a building after an earthquake. Everybody finding their footing again, not quite certain of the ground. Carver snapped off her outer gloves, dropped them in the bin, and checked the crick tube one more time. Then she turned to the nearest resident. He needs imaging in the next 10 minutes. His left side is going to swell back. She looked at the monitor. Watch his pressure. She walked out. Voss did not stop her. He did not say anything. He stood at the foot of the gurney with his hands at his sides and looked at the door she had just walked through, and I saw on his face something I had never seen on Harlan Voss in 11 months. He did not know what to do next. I found her in the break room. She was standing at the window with a cup of coffee she had not drunk yet, watching the parking lot. I don't know why I followed her. I think I needed to see if she was all right, the way you check on something after a storm to see if it held. You good? I said. She looked at me. He going to be okay? I think so, I said. From what they're saying, she nodded. Looked back at the parking lot. Where did you learn that? I said. I could not help it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, a valley in Kunar province. Bad day. A lot of them go back to a bad day. She did not say more than that, and I did not push. But I noticed then, because I was standing close, the glint of metal at her collar, a dog tag on a beaded chain tucked under the V-neck of her scrubs. Military issue, worn close to the skin, not jewelry. The kind of thing you don't take off. I did not ask about it. I should tell you. I went home that night thinking I had seen something remarkable and that it would stay between those walls, the way remarkable things in hospitals usually do. That we would go back to our ordinary, that Carver would be reassigned when the census dropped, and that the man she had saved would become a file number in the federal system, and that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 40 minutes. That is how long it took. I was back on the floor, finishing the rounds I had abandoned, when I heard it, a sound I did not have a category for at first. Not alarms. Not the specific controlled noise of a trauma response. Something more organized. A cadence of boots on a hard floor. I came to the top of the main corridor and looked down toward the ER entrance, and I stopped. There were soldiers at the doors. Not one or two. Not the handful that sometimes came through with an injured colleague. A formation. Full-dress uniform, green berets in hand, the kind of bearing you cannot fake or practice into a civilian, and that you either have or you don't. They filled the lobby entrance, maybe 24 men, and at the front of them was an officer, a lieutenant colonel, I would learn, whose uniform bore the kind of ribbons that make even people who don't know the military stop and look twice. The formation had not come loud. That was the thing. 24 soldiers in dress uniform in a hospital lobby, and they made less noise than any group of civilians I had ever watched enter that building, because they were not here to be noticed. They were here for one reason, and they intended to do it properly. Glenn Partridge, our administrator, was already there. He looked like a man who had received a phone call he hadn't understood, and was now watching the answer walk through his front door. The lieutenant colonel spoke to him briefly, not unkindly, and I heard 3 words clearly from where I was standing. Where is she? It was not a question. Partridge pointed toward the bay. The officer thanked him. The formation moved. I have no way to adequately describe what it looked like to watch 24 Rangers in full dress uniform walk through a hospital corridor toward a break room where a woman in teal scrubs was standing at a window with cold coffee. I will only tell you that every person in that hallway, nurses, residents, and attending who was not Voss, two family members who had been crying 10 minutes ago, went completely still, the way a room goes still when it understands that it is witnessing something it will not see again. Carver came out of the break room before they reached it. I think she heard them, or felt them. She stepped into the corridor and looked down its length, and something happened on her face that I can only describe as recognition. Not surprise, but the expression of a debt she had known was out there, arriving at last. The lieutenant colonel stopped in front of her. He looked at the dog tag visible at her collar, and then at her face. He came to attention. Behind him, the formation came to attention as one. Sergeant First Class Carver, so he said, and his voice carried down that whole corridor and into every room with an open door. On behalf of the men you brought home and the one you brought home today, we know who you are. We know what you did in that valley, and we know what you did in that bay. He reached into his breast pocket and held out a challenge coin, the regimental coin, with the 75th scroll, given from a commanding officer's hand. 9 men walked out of Kunar province because of you. The battalion doesn't forget. She took the coin, held it in her palm, looked at it for a long moment. How is he? She said, meaning the man on the gurney, meaning the man she had just saved, the one the marshals had brought in with no name on his wristband. Stable, the lieutenant colonel said. Because of you, again. She closed her hand around the coin. I do not know when Harlan Voss arrived in that corridor. I did not see him come. But when I looked over my shoulder, he was there, standing at the edge of the hallway with his arms at his sides, watching. Not Partridge, not the formation. Watching Carver, the way you watch someone when you are rearranging everything you believed about them and the space they occupy. She did not look at him. She didn't need to. The formation was quiet for a moment. Then the lieutenant colonel said her call sign, Iron 9, and every man behind him straightened one fraction more, the way a current runs through a wire, and the corridor held the kind of silence that is not empty but full. Full of 9 men who had come home. Full of one more. I have been in that hospital for 6 years now. I have watched a great many things happen in its corridors and bays and waiting rooms, and I have tried over time to keep a clear accounting of what they meant. What I know is this. She never asked for the room to move. She never raised her voice. She walked into the place they had put her, and she did the work that needed doing, and the work told the truth for her, the way it always does for people who have been doing it long enough. And in hard enough places that the truth is simply the only thing they carry anymore. I still work here. I still walk that corridor. Some days, when a new face comes through the bay on an overflow assignment, and the attendings look past them the way attendings do, I think about what I do not know about the person in the room with me, about what any of us have done or carried or survived before we put on a set of scrubs and showed up to do the quiet work of keeping the living alive. I think about a dog tag on a beaded chain tucked under a collar, worn close to the skin. And I think about a valley in Kunar province and 9 men, and a bad day that somebody made survivable, and how some debts travel 40 minutes by formation through a hospital corridor in dress uniform to be paid.